In these particular passages, what we have is a mixture of events that are taking place at a particular time. In reading Mark's gospel in chapter 11, you find that this is during the season of Passover. So this will be around late March, early April. Some have looked at the fig tree and they've said several different things. It is not that the fig tree did anything wrong, but what Jesus does is he uses the fig tree and he makes a parable. He uses it as an illustrative parable or to teach his disciples something. As a matter of fact, when you look at this passage, about which we've gone through thus far, what you will find in this passage is a declaration of faith. Not only a declaration of faith, but you also find a declaration of praise, a declaration of worship, a declaration of praise and a declaration of worship where others refuse to offer it. In this passage, you find a group that is rejecting Jesus and yet a group that is receiving Jesus. It is an older generation of leadership, religious as well as civil leadership, that is rejecting him. And it is a young generation of people who receive insight as Jesus does marvelous things. I want to ask the question, could you actually look into this passage and see a reflection of the present day in which we live? Can you look into this passage, even when it comes to the church, and see some who hear and see and recognize and experience what God is doing and he's done, and they bless his name? And yet others who may see the church as a covering to feel good when I'm not doing so well. Interesting. Somebody say interesting. Just wanted to make sure you were there. Interesting. There are two things that I see in this passage. Two things that I see working. And these things are important today. And those things are, I can say three: recognition, praise and worship, and faith in God. I want to say this. Those three things go hand in hand. Everybody say recognition. Everybody say praise and worship. Everybody say faith in God. Those three things go hand in hand. Because if one is missing, then the others cannot be complete. When God is praised, and you can take that as a subject if you want to. All right, recognition, praise and worship, and faith in God. You want something for the CDs? Recognition, praise and worship, and faith in God. When God is working, it is impossible to to put your total trust in God if you don't acknowledge the God who's doing the works. If God is changing things, turning things around, if I might borrow from Dr. Taylor, she gave you a strong hint. I said this some years ago. When we think we're going through something, there's usually someone who's gone through more. We can be pretty hard on people and not recognize the things that they've gone through. Dr. Taylor shared her plight, 9 years. Some people will commit suicide going through what he's gone through. And another came after her, and you might have thought it was superficial, but that was a woman who nursed her child up until 12. And then the child was here no more. That's a tough thing to live through when you outlive a child who didn't even make it to adulthood. Sometimes things like that happen in people's life and they begin to question God. They find it difficult to praise him, to worship him because of the fact that something that they believed, yes, I did say that, something that they believed belonged to them totally is taken away. But if I have faith in God, in other words, I trust him, I rely on him, I give credence to the truth of his word, I recognize that everything that comes in my life is a byproduct of what God has done, and in truth, what God owns and what God has the final say on. The earth is the Lord's, the fullness thereof. That would be you and I. I am not my own. I've been bought with the price. I glorify God in my body even in times of trouble. And so Jesus came to the earth to satisfy something that was deeply needed. Jesus came to the earth to satisfy man's need of deliverance, man's need to be rescued, man's need of salvation. And it didn't come in the way that some people thought it would come. But when he came, he also investigated, and he had the right because it's his creation. I read these 3 passages because I'm going to put all of this together so that you can see it. Mark tends to give the more, as you would say, he lays it out. He goes a little more panoramic in his view of things. Matthew goes a little more microscopic. He gives a little less. And Luke just gives a varied portion. But when we put it all together, we see something. If I were to take this and read before, Jesus had come to the area from Bethany. And when he came to Jerusalem, Bethany about 2 miles from Jerusalem, he came to Jerusalem. The word says he went into the temple. And this going into the temple is not just saying he took a look, but he went through all of the temple, the outer courts, the inner courts, and he went in there and he left. And he went back to Bethany. But when we get down to the 12th verse, we see where he came back. For we're approaching Passover. Are you with me thus far? Now, when Jesus went to the temple the first day, I'm almost certain by what happened, by what we see happening here, he noticed everything that was taking place. He checked out what was in the temple. There are some things that have positioned themselves or have been positioned in the temple that had no business being there. There were some things that had taken the place of worship. Are you with me here? And it was more so ritualistic. It was pseudo-religion. I want to even go further than ritualistic. Something that taken the place of worship known as profiteering. Do you know what that is? I'm talking to you. Do you know what that is? Something had taken the place known as Profiteering. Okay, I'll use another word. Merchandising. Do you know what that is? Buying and selling. Do you know what that is? And the religious institution was all behind it. And so when he goes back, before he reaches, it tells us that he was hungry. His appetite needed to be satisfied. And he saw a fig tree with leaves, and seeing the fig tree from a distance with leaves, you would assume that there are fruit as well. Now, why would you assume that there are fruit as well? Why would you think that since there are leaves, apparently there's fruit? I'll give this to you. Usually, whenever a fig tree has leaves, now it can get some early foliage with no figs. It can get some early foliage with no figs. But usually when the fig tree is complete with leaves, the fruit will come at the same time. This tree appeared as one that would be fruitful, but it only had leaves. And there's something else that happened. It tells us that this one particular fig tree sprouted leaves before its season. Usually the fig tree brings about fruit and leaves, not in March or April, but in June. So it's before its season, but it has leaves. So if this tree has gone this far before its season, then it should have gone all the way. Now, the tree hasn't done anything wrong. I want you to understand this here. When he does what he does, the tree, somebody say nature. Nature is neither moral or amoral. You know, there's no moral aspect to it when it comes to this tree. But he found nothing but leaves because the season of figs was not yet. And so what Jesus did is he spoke and he said, this tree will not bring forth fruit ever again. And the word says that his disciples heard what he said. His disciples heard what he said. It will never bring forth fruit again. Jesus says what he says, and then he moves on. And when he goes to Jerusalem, now remember, he went the day before. He goes to Jerusalem, and there when he steps into the temple, he gets busy. And this is not the first time, but this is the second time. In the earlier portion of his ministry, you read of it in John 2. This is the year of opposition. In other words, this is the last portion of Jesus' ministry. The first portion of his ministry will be the year of obscurity. Once his fame is spread abroad, that is known as the year of popularity. And when he gets to the point where they're now ready to take him out, this is the year of opposition. So he's towards the end of his ministry, and when he comes into the temple, you see that apparently from what he did the first time, things have not changed. They're still doing the same crazy stuff. Somebody say it real loud. They're still doing the crazy stuff. So he goes in the temple, and when he goes in the temple, what Jesus does is he casts out individuals. He throws out individuals who are doing something that they have no business doing. When you look at this ek out and balo, to throw, he's throwing them out. He's throwing individuals out who are buying and selling in the temple. He takes the money changers' tables and he throws them over. Here's the problem with the money changers' tables. When the people would come into the temple, what they would do is they would take the money and they would exchange it. They'd have money changers and they would exchange it with a common currency. You might even say, Kasia, a temple currency. Are you with me in here? But they would do this at exorbitant prices. So they were robbing the people of God. Are you